this room feels to me like home. And I want to reflect for a minute on why that must be. I think I'm a person, when I was a boy, was asked to leave several choirs because I was leading people astray. And I feel like no matter what I did in this room, I couldn't lead you all astray. And that's because you're centered on something. And I think that's a very powerful thing to note, because the thing you're centered on isn't a doctrine or a Bible or an instruction manual. It's a kind of ethic about community first and second and possibly third before you bring in other players. And I think I want to start with that because one of the issues I've heard us talking around, sometimes explicitly and sometimes implicitly, is trust. How you build it, how you lose it. And part of our work must be understood as about fostering trust, deserving trust, retaining trust, and losing trust. I also feel I come into this room as a bad singer who's welcomed to the choir, because in fact what we've gathered here are a set of complementary approaches, not a model. That's been said many times, but it was our expectation way back in the dawn of time in the late 60s actually, that we wanted to be talking about what people showed us they knew how to do, and sometimes to provide a name for it, but not necessarily steer them in a different direction. So the fact that this far along in the work, people can still be looking at one another's style and approach as complementary, as something to learn from, as something that names, strengthens, and reinforces local work underway is a very powerful thing to have retained, because we could easily have become a movement about starting things, trying to garden in parking lots, as we say in the program I do in the Balkans, which is how the young people talk about leadership. It's like trying to garden in a parking lot. And for me, it reinforces the image of this work as a compass and not a map. People aren't in this conference much demanding a map or an instruction manual. And I think that's the thing I want to note, that they're not looking for more instruction and more specificity, but they are asking about getting to a deeper level of practice and talking about implementation challenges in real terms. They are interested in talking about trust and relationship building as a practice rather than just as a goal. So even though there are aspects of this that remain useful as guidance, we've moved to a new stage, and I feel like this work is entering a new phase where we have to think about encouraging overlapping communities of practice and a way for them to communicate with one another over time. So I do think that's one of the things I've heard. I think a lot of the language discussions, debates, and disagreements have been trying to sort out some of those overlapping communities of practice that aren't always familiar with one another's terms. They're a sign that we're onto something, but we're not quite 100% sure it's the same something. And so we want to check in around those issues. I also think that that process is improved significantly by Cody's style and ethic, which I'm learning a lot about, thankfully, of stocking the room with practitioners. It's lovely to see funders and academics at the margin of this discussion and not in the center, because their language creeps in and takes over. The professional class will name your stuff and steal it from you as fast as you can take a good night's sleep. So the fact that it's dominated by practitioners and their concerns, and that we join in the listening about that, not necessarily in the solving or immediate figuring out of that, is a very powerful thing that has to do with the composition of this room. And I want to make note of that and give credit to Cody for that. One of the things I learned as an organizer is that community meetings change when there's small kids in the group. Somehow, stuff rises to the surface with kids in the room that doesn't rise to the surface when it's just the elders, you know. And it's similar here. So practitioners in the center matters, just like community in the center matters. There are a couple things that I guess I'm hearing people struggling with, and maybe that we need to be a little more purposeful about. And one of those is learning and evaluation, or especially from my point of view as a failed evaluator, the learning part. How can we be more intentional and purposeful about that? And how can we be more inventive about ongoing ways to do that? I think ideas like apprenticeships rather than decentralized training are an interesting way of challenging that. I think about how you spread ideas and innovations in the modern age. It could be, when I look around this room, we're not maybe the right age to understand how we spread some of these ideas, but the young people I work with every July in the Balkans have taught me a lot about how you can spread stuff in difficult terrain and difficult circumstances. So I think how we circulate some of these ideas and interact with one another is a really important ethic that we need to think through. And in keeping with that, I think that our work is challenged around succession issues and around young people coming into the picture. Not just because they're young, but because they're central to what's already going on. And they will need to be central to how it works going forward. So it's not just to freshen our point of view, it's to get grounded in what's happening. When Milosevic fell, the young people that I had been involved in my youth training institute were busy organizing a rally that took place on the hilltops around Belgrade rather than in the main square. I don't know if any of you have heard this story, but basically since they were told they couldn't gather, they decided to have a rally by all lighting a Bic lighter at 9 p.m. instead of going to the rally, and then throw away your Bic lighter. And it was a ring of light that probably increased turnout for that election by about 40%. I don't know of an older, maybe a smoker of a certain sort would have thought of that, but mostly it was a young people's impulse to do this thing with cell phones and Bic lighters because they didn't need all the technology and the public address announcer and a permit, certainly. So I guess those are some observations. The other thing that I hear us talking about a fair amount in many different discussions is how the practice is taking shape in different forms around the set of fields that we represent. And I would encourage us, and this is sort of talking to myself, to keep looking at the periphery instead of the center of our work. Keep looking not at the full-blown implementations of the ABCD approach or the Cody ethic, but look at the partial implementations. Look at places where it's useful but not perfect. Take a little bit more of a careful, deeper look at places where it's not working quite right or where it's bumpy. I really do have respect for the good story and the energy that you get from the exemplary projects, but I think we also have to start taking in a little bit more information about where it's bumpy and challenging and where particularly it has to confront power at the end of the day.